Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Vicki Grove Scott, and I'm the Dean for the College of Education at the University of Central Arkansas. And it is my privilege to have been the Dean for the last 6 years. I'm going on my 7th year. And one of the things that we have really put a lot of time and effort and energy into is work around centering equity in everything that we do. And we know that centering equity is an action. It's not just something that you talk about, and it's not just something that you think about, but it really reflects in what do you do. So today we're going to talk about really centering equity and centering your students and making sure that your students are in environments where they feel like they belong, and that your classrooms are developed so that they're culturally responsive. And my co-presenter is Dr. Michael Mills. Dr. Mills, you want to introduce yourself?
I am the associate dean and help the dean do what we need to do here at the college. And one of those things is making sure that we have a lot of programs for potential students and to take care of our students once we get them. And we do want to point out that we have a lot of graduate programs, both degree seeking and certificate seeking. We encourage you to go to our website. You can see the link in the bottom right of the screen, and find a program that if you're interested in getting another certificate or a degree. And if you're not, pass this information on to a friend or a family member. And if this is too much for you right here, you can just email us. Our emails are on the website, uca.edu/COE. Be happy to talk to anybody about these programs, because we really do believe in what we're doing, and we want to be a positive change, positive force in education in Arkansas.
So today
Dean.
we're going to spend some time thinking about and talking about equity, and we're hoping that that is a catalyst for the actions that will come in your own classrooms or in your own environment. But we're going to spend some time talking together and building connections where we support each other and challenge each other to have these conversations as we kind of lean into things that can be difficult. And I'd like to encourage people to think about this as a brave space, someplace where you can share and get answers, because sometimes we feel uncomfortable asking questions, but we want this to be a learning space. And so we're going to challenge you to make those connections and to lean into those discussions.
Right. And our ethos for today's session, and you may have seen this term used as norms in other sessions. Generally, these are the kind of the standards that we hold ourselves to within the session. When we talk about sharing our wisdom, we are going to have some opportunities for you to share if you wish. We don't like to force anybody into that, but if you do have something to share, we certainly want to hear that. But we also, since we are dealing with issues of equity, it's a lot more controversial than I think it should be in many respects, because generally speaking, what we're talking about is making sure every child, regardless of race, ethnicity, reading ability, socioeconomic status, physical disabilities, what have you, we want to make sure everyone has an equal opportunity to learn, right? And so even with that, we know that we don't always agree on how best to meet the needs of all of our students. So from time to time, we will need to lean into discomfort and discuss hard truths that we're dealing with. But as we own this learning, for us, we engage in research and discussions. Heck, the dean does a town hall and focus groups with students all the time to get information and feedback from our students. We delve into this because we want to humbly learn more, because we're always in this journey. And I use the word journey specifically because as much as we would like to have all of this solved, but we will not solve this. We will always have controversial issues. We'll always have students who need more help, extra help, and we need to expect that we're not going to have this all wrapped up it is indeed a journey, and the best we can do is to move forward humbly but proactively for our students' benefit.
So we're going to think a little bit, or I'm going to ask you to think a little bit about your identities. And we don't just have one identity, we have multiple identities. And these are things that that you feel are what makes you you. So if you think about, you know, how do you identify? What are the things that are the most salient? Things will come up, things like your ability, your religion, your age, your sexual orientation, immigration status, gender expression, gender. So, and those two things are different. Socioeconomic status, ethnicity, education, marital status, and race. And so those are kind of the big ones that we think about. So I'd like you to take a look at these and write down 2 or 3 that that would, if somebody said, what is your identity? What would be the things that would come to your mind? So just write down a couple of those. And we're going to talk a little bit about how these identities shape you. And not only do they shape you, but they shape your interactions with others. So my ability will shape my interaction with others in my ability to communicate, my ability to be recognized, my ability to be seen, my ability to be taken credibility. So those are a lot, those really shape how you interact with people. Some of these identities are really easy to see. So you can see age, although hopefully not as much as I'd like you to be able. And Michael just told me a story about how somebody guessed his age and he actually won a prize because they couldn't. So I just met with a very, very influential educator in the state of Arkansas. And he and I have regular conversations. And if you know him, it's Ray Simon. And Ray told me that as he's gotten older, he feels like people take him less seriously. They're like, oh yeah, you know, his ideas are old. And people do have biases related to these. So some of these identities are really easy to see. Some of them are hidden. Some of them bring about it privilege, and some of them bring about it a bias.
You know, we were discussing this with some faculty members a few months ago, and one of our faculty members actually brought up a really good point regarding regionality, you know, geographic regionality, about how his accent invited scorn and bias because he has a Southern accent, and he said that there were assumptions made about his intelligence based on that, just that one piece of who he is. That is not something that he's going to change or he needs to change, but it certainly impacts how others view him.
The other thing that I'd like to mention related to this is sometimes these things change. So like socioeconomic status and marital status. And just speaking for myself personally, you know, growing up, I was lower socioeconomic in status, but today I'm not. And so, but that really reflects and really kind of shades my interactions with people and interactions with things. So I go places and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's going to be so expensive. And I think about, oh, I could never travel there. I could never do this. And I'm constantly kind of pushing back against that, you know, lower socioeconomic status where I had to worry about as a child. We worried about, you know, how we were going to get food and how we were going to pay the rent and how we were going to do those things. And that's definitely changed, but it does cloud my interactions.
You bring up a really good point, Vicki. In that sense, you know, you're essentially talking about identities as, even if you move into a different identity, those identities remain as residual parts of who you are no matter what. And I want to connect that to, if you think about our students, for example, you know, I taught high school, right? And I would, from time to time, get a student who had a chip on his shoulder or her shoulder. And they would be the quote unquote problem child. That, we'd look at our rosters before and everything, and you're not supposed to do that, but everyone did, and everybody like, oh, you better watch out for him or watch out for her. And I never really felt comfortable about that, because I always felt like students bring with them what they bring with them, and they are who they are. And in many cases, when a student brings that baggage, a lot of times it's because their identity was challenged in such a way over the course of the years they've been in school. And so they're thinking, why why would this person treat me any differently than these other people have treated me? I might as well go in and protect myself, right? So, and I think we all do that to some degree too. And as we think about these identities, and thank you, Vicki, for highlighting all of those, I want you to think about, Vicki's going to lead us through an activity here in a second. And I know some of you are like, man, I don't want to do an activity. I just want you to talk to me and let me do my webinar. But no, Vicki, she's a taskmaster, and she's going to make us do work, right? But in this sense, this equity story is an opportunity for you to share a time in your life when surely either you experienced some type of privilege or bias because of an identity that you have, or you observed it being done to someone else. Okay? And Vicki is going to, well, first of all, I'm going to let Vicki explain kind of what we're going to do, and then she's going to share an equity story to give you an example.
So being in the public school system or working in just public service in general, I'm sure that all of you have had an opportunity to witness inequities where people have been biased or marginalized or disadvantaged because of their identities, one of those identities. And remember, sometimes those identities are seen and sometimes those identities are unseen. But I want you to think about a story that you might have that you're willing to share, where it brings up this inequity in just public school life. And I'm going to share one with you. So this is a story that that is a story that was told to me by a student who was at UCA, and she has given me permission to share this story. So I'm not appropriating her story. But when she shared this story with me last summer, it really struck me, and it was something that really hit me hard. So she's a UCA candidate of color. She's in a rural school, and the school is all white, and she's the only person of color in the school. She's doing her internship 2, which is our student teaching in a second grade classroom, and she's walking down the hall with her group of second graders. And one of the little girls looks at her and says, "My mommy told me I shouldn't hold your hand because Black people's skin are slimy." And she was shocked. And so she said to this little girl, "Well, do you think my hand is slimy?" And the little girl says, "No," but she still doesn't hold her hand. So she goes back to the classroom and she talks to her mentor teacher, her cooperating teacher, and says, "Look, this is what happened in the hall." And the mentor teacher says to her, "Well, I'm just shocked that she said that your hand was slimy because I thought your skin would be dry." And as the girl's telling me this story, she starts to cry at that part. And she says, "I can understand a little girl who's been taught by their parents that, Black people are so different that you shouldn't want to be touched. But I don't understand why my cooperating teacher just kind of blew me off." And that's what she said. She just kind of blew me off. So the teacher did not first say to her, "Are you okay?" She did not address this with her class in any way. And what a wonderful teaching moment where she could talk about, race and about how people are the same. And even in second grade, we can talk about how people are the same. But she didn't do any of that. She just said, "Oh, well, I thought your skin would be dry." She didn't talk about anything at all related to how this student had been othered and how she then felt like she didn't belong. And it gets even worse because I said to her, "Did you tell your UCA supervisor?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Because I think my supervisor is friends with my mentor teacher, and I really need to get a job after graduation." That just broke my heart. And the part that broke my heart was the bottom part, is that UCA wasn't there to support this student, that's our student, through a difficult situation because she thought our loyalties lied with the district and with the teacher and not with her. And not that we wanted to make this into, an incident where we're going to, publicly call somebody out. But this is a wonderful, wonderful situation where we could lean into some difficult conversations, and really address microaggressions that are going on in the classroom. So this was just one of the many stories that I'm sure that we've all had. So we were going to give you some time to think about your own stories. Michael, you want to describe what we're going to do?
I was muted. So what we'd like for you to do is take about 10, we actually think we may do 15 minutes because we know the need to stretch during these online PDs and such. So we're actually going to take 15 minutes. I think that'll be like at around 10:35. We're going to pull back here, but just take a little time to just think to yourself of a story kind of along the lines of what Vicki shared, and a time where your identity was made was part of a situation in which there was bias or maybe privilege, or one that you observed. Okay, you can do it. You can write your story out the way that Vicki did, which I thought was really effective. Just a few little blurbs just to kind of walk through, because sometimes when we revisit these stories in such a way, we start thinking about those details, and those details are where we really find the point of contact where that identity became so pronounced. And we're going to pull you back, and then we're going to have an opportunity to put you into breakout rooms where you'll have the opportunity to share if you wish. But actually, I tell you what, why don't we do, I'm gonna change that a little bit. Let's do 10 minutes right now, and then we'll give more time when you do the breakout rooms in case y'all want to discuss or such, okay? So we're going to come back at 10:30.
All right, I set the timer right now, and I'll play a little writing and thinking music. If I can find something that's
I hope it's not CCR.
All right, hopefully we've given you guys enough time to think about something. And I know that sometimes when we ask you to think about an equity story, there are just so many that flood in, especially if you've had some time in community service or public schools. So we're going to put you into breakout groups, and we're going to give you some time to share. And again, this is going to be one of those times where we're going to ask you to kind of lean into those difficult conversations and to be a really good listener, and to listen without the intent to respond, but to listen just to listen. So
all right.
Michael, manage the groups.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the groups, and we're going to take 15 minutes, and y'all decide how you want to do, like, discussion, if you want to go take a little break or whatever. But we will pull you back in about 15 minutes.
Well, hopefully we had a good conversation. I know that we certainly did in my group. Does anybody feel comfortable sharing a little bit about what your group discussed? Remember that Dr. Mills and I are good teachers, and we have appropriate wait time. So
research supported.
I'll share.
Thank you, Dee Dee.
I did mine on my first year of teaching, something that kind of stood out with me, and it was a good lesson to be learned. I had several children, but one in particular and let me preface this by saying my area is speech path and special ed. So I was doing speech path right out of college, and I had a parent call me on a Wednesday night in a panic, that a birthday invitation had come home with her child in the backpack, and she didn't really know what to do, was the gist of it. And I guess I was confused as to why she was calling me and asking me something like that and how I was supposed to help. But the child had never been invited to anything like a birthday party or a sleepover or anything like that. And so once I figured that out, of course, my heart was broken. I didn't have kids at the time. And I just, it was shocking to me, I guess. And so I talked the mom through, go get the gift, you're going to do all these kinds of things. And she knew those basic things, but she just, I think, just needed to vent. And so on Thursday and Friday, we just talked about what do you do at a birthday party and, how you act. And she had apraxia, so it was really hard to understand her. And I think that's probably why she was left out of a lot of stuff. Very smart little girl, but just hard to understand her speech. And anyway, so she went to the birthday. In the meantime, I talked to the little girl that had invited her, and I thanked her and I appreciated that she was invited. And I told her that she was a little bit anxious and all that, but the party went well. Everything was good. And the next week, we spent that week talking about that. So it was good talking about pragmatics and everything that goes on in those social situations. And that was really eye-opening to me because I just never thought about that because, for one, I'm from a huge family and we had birthday parties all the time. And then I had friends. And so I just never thought about the people that never got invited to birthday parties for whatever reason. And I don't think it was to be excluded. I think it was just kind of fear, or just not even thinking about it, fear of the unknown, or not even thinking about that. So that was something that stuck with me. And I kind of made that a big priority to kind of buddy the kids up and things like that so that they would have friendship groups. And that's when I kind of realized that it's really important to make sure that kids have friends. They learn academically. That's the number one thing we need to be doing, but they also need to have those friendships and they need to be nurtured if kids don't know how to be friends. So that was it had a great ending, but a very sad beginning.
That is a great story. Anyone else want to share?
Vicki, as some of the participants are thinking about sharing, because I know they want to share so badly, but I will mention it's interesting when you're talking about the identities and how they change. It really resonated with me whenever you said that, because I start thinking about, for my identity growing up as a school child, it was completely different because of the living in poverty piece, right? But when I became an adult, my identity shifted, even though I still had that residual, but I'm sure it doesn't surprise any of y'all, but I have not experienced any bias because I'm white or male. In fact, I think in many respects, that has mitigated a lot of potential bias from my background, right? And I think it's given me opportunities that otherwise I would not have had. And I speak to that plainly because I can tell you, like we were in our group, we were talking about, in many respects, gender bias, or stature, like how tall you are or your background, what have you, and I can assure all of you that yes, there are people who are very sexist, very racist, because in many respects I have encountered many instances where I was expected to fall in line. I was told something, or something was shared with me, or something was said, a joke or a comment, and I was expected to affirm it. I was expected to check it off as you are completely right. And I think the one that shocked me more than I expected it to, because I had already seen a lot of racism before this, but when I was working in a school before working here at UCA, it's a school outside of Little Rock, and I remember the assistant superintendent He was a white male. He's in charge of HR, hiring people. And he had me go through a stack of applications for one of the new high school English teacher positions. And he wanted me to go through and find the ones that, most qualified. And at one point, he's going through the ones, he's going through to make sure that they have everything that they need and everything. He's passing them over to me in his office. And he holds one up, and I'll never forget, he holds it up and he goes, UAPB, you know what that means? I said, University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. He goes, nope, you are probably black. And at that point, when he said that, he looks at me, and I could tell I think he's expecting me to laugh, to whatever. And I was in shock. I was like, oh my God, we read about these things, what do we do next? And I said, I don't know if that's necessarily appropriate. And I remember I felt like this heaviness right here in the back of my neck was getting all hot because I was thinking, I'm about to step into it and I don't know what to do. And I said, I'll be honest with you, I kind of feel uncomfortable with that. And I feel like we need to interview her now. He said, well, she's plainly not qualified because you look at her grades, and she did. She had poor grades. It was all that. I said, I understand that, but there's obviously a connection that you made that isn't anyhow related to her qualification. So I think we owe it to her at least to interview her, And so we did, and she didn't do very well in the interview, but, and all that stuff. But I was thinking, this is how it happens. It just happens. And I don't know, it changed how I see people. And not, I can't say, for the better in all those respects.
Yeah, I do think that those identities sometimes cause bias that just comes unconsciously, and people don't even think about it, and they say or do things that will put up barriers for people. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing, everyone. Thank you for thinking about this.
We've been talking about equity in relation to identities, and much of what we do here at UCA, we try to identify all the different ways in which people express themselves or are expressed, whether it's disabilities that they face or their gender expression, their race, ethnicity, gender. Geographic representation, all those different pieces. But one piece that we know is of prime concern for us here at UCA, as we try to prepare teachers to go out into the real world and such, we've noticed the interaction between our students and teachers, in-service teachers, with students of poverty and students of color seem to be the most pressing concerns that we have here in the state. And we've looked into this, we've done research. We do want to highlight, like when we talk about identity, and like in particular, we're going to focus on a racial identity here for a second, but please understand that that's not the only focus that we have, because there are so many ways that we identify, right? But I'm sure it wouldn't surprise you that here in the state of Arkansas, even though black students make up only about 17% of all of our students in the entire state, 47% of them are in D&F schools. Only 19% are in AB schools. And a lot of that has to do with our history of segregation in the South in general and in the state more specifically. And it's just kind of moved people into very segregated quarters. And whenever you have any type of segregation based on identity, resources get segregated too. And so we see a perpetual problem. When you see down here white students, that statistically speaking, that should be a lot higher. That should be, I mean, because we have a lot of white kids in our schools, and there should be a lot more white kids in the C and D and F schools if things were equitable in our state. Not that we want anybody in D and F schools. We would hope that everyone would be in an A-B school, but this is an illustration kind of like how our system itself kind of perpetuates this inequity based on racial identity. And whenever you think about, well, how does this work in real time? I did an analysis of how many kids we place in GT programs. And when you look at the percentage of students that you have in each school by race, you'll notice that white students on average are placed more than they should be, demographically speaking, than Asian students. But Asian students and white students are still over-identified. In other words, there are kids in GT who don't really necessarily fit those criteria. But when you look at black students, I was telling Vicki here a second ago, I had to actually modify this slide because if I'm going to do it proportional, I had to move if you notice, black went down even more because it shouldn't be that. If anything, it should be like maybe negative 0.5 or plus 0.5, kind of within a standard error. But when you're talking about your Hispanic kids and your black kids being underrepresented so much, well, those are opportunities and resources that these kids don't get access to. And part of that goes to, if you look at, let's take all the schools that are a low percentage of non-white schools. In other words, mostly white kids. Well, on average, about 4 out of 10 kids have some type of disciplinary action. But whenever you look at the segregated schools, you see a lot more disciplinary actions. And whenever students are sent to the office or suspended, they're not taking part of the opportunities that they should be. And Vicki actually pointed out some research when we were talking about this. She pointed out some very salient research that might inform that.
So one of the things that we were looking at in the research, and I didn't do this research, I want to say that Michael Mills did do the other research before, but this is research that I just read. So there's some studies that suggest that teachers scrutinize Black boys more than they do other populations. So in general, we scrutinize boys more than girls. But a large proportion of what we look at and what we watch and scrutinize are Black boys. And I'm going to give you an example. So I was at a water park several years ago when my kids were young, and we were in the lazy river, and my son was like in and out, and there's a big sign that says stay in your inner tube, and my son's in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out of his inner tube, pop up and out, up and down, up and down. And there's a little boy in front of us who's African American, and he's doing the exact same thing, in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. And we go around the corner, and the lifeguard is standing there, and the lifeguard calls the little boy in front of us and says, I have been watching you this whole entire time. You cannot stay in your inner tube. We're going to kick you out of the park. And she's just going off on this kid. You know the rules. The sign is right there. I've told you to stay in the inner tube. She's also told my son to stay in the inner tube. Only she told him once, and she told this other boy a couple of more times. You've been told, and get out. You need to get out of the lazy river, and we're gonna remove you from the park. And so she was just going on and on to the point that I thought, okay, I can't just sit here and do something. So I got out of my inner tube and I said to her, do you realize that my son was doing the exact same thing, and that you are calling out this kid for inappropriate behavior, but you're not calling out my son. And I just want you to think about why. Why would you do that? Why are you doing this? And that's what happens. If we watch and scrutinize behavior more toward one population, we're going to see misbehavior. We're going to see it. We're going to see the bad. If we're intently looking at that, we are going to see that. And I've been in lots of situations where there are little girls at the back of the classroom who are chit-chatting away, and little boys at the back of the classroom chit-chatting away. And the teacher says to the boys, that's it, stop, you're disruptive, and I've told you enough. And the girls are like, oh, they're just chatting. The little girls are just chatty. And they'll discipline the boys before they'll discipline the girls. So that probably leads to this: how many times do kids get suspended? And I also have been reading some research about Black girls. And information about Black girls is that Black girls are often perceived as being more adult. They can handle things better. They don't need to be protected. They're not as innocent. And so therefore, white girls tend to get coddled. And if they get in trouble, it's, what can we do to help you? And Black girls get in trouble and it's, well, you knew better. And they're the ones that get suspended, or they're the ones that are penalized in all kinds of different ways. And a lot of it's related to, who are we watching?
That's right. I'm going to stop sharing that because I want to share something else that goes straight to what the dean was talking about here. Y'all should see this research article. I was just reading this research article the other day for some work that I'm doing. And specifically, the part that stuck out to me was right here, the white teachers' estimations of students' mathematical ability favored white students, both boys and girls, over students of color, whereas white teachers' estimations of students' mathematical ability favored boys over girls. So bottom line is, just as the stereotypes fit, people are like, girls can't do math. And why do we have, I read an article the other day where people were mad because there's a girls STEM club. Like, why do we have a girls STEM club? Shouldn't it be everyone's club? And it's like, well, yes, but it's not. So we need to introduce equity. And the reason why we do these things is because there are clear problems in our system. We're keeping females away from math and science fields, and particularly our Black and Hispanic students. So in many respects, that yes, we need to address a lot of these issues, right? And I think in many respects, what the dean spoke to about who the teachers are watching, you have to ask yourself, why do we do that? Why do we look at, like for me, I will be honest with you, as a high school English teacher, if you sat in the back, I instantly assumed you were going to be up to no good, that you're going to be doing something. And in many respects, I think I probably was harder on the guys than on the girls because I was raised by a single mom, and that was just part of it. And I'm not saying that was right. But we get to, why do we do these things? And I think it often comes down to, what are our priorities in our field and in our personal lives? So we pulled together a little talk about finding our why.
Often, if you've been in schools for long, you will encounter teachers who've forgotten why they're there. It just happens. And it's easy to happen. It's easy. And because we know what we do, we teach. We know how we do it. We write lesson plans, we put together curriculum, we have activities, and sometimes we get so into what we do and how we do it, we've forgotten why we do that. We've forgotten why we're there. And this is where we see teachers who are acting on their unconscious bias, who are frankly sometimes mean. They do things that are mean. They say things to kids that they will carry with them the rest of their life. And I bet you every one of you in this room, every one of you here could write down the name of a teacher and something unkind that a teacher said or did to you. And that will stick with you the rest of your life. And teachers just do not realize sometimes the amount of influence that they have to either make or break a kid's day. And when they are the person who is breaking that kid's day, it's because they've forgotten their why. They've forgotten why they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to show you a little video that talks about your why.
Oh, you might want to turn your video off to make sure that our while this video is playing, so it will stream well for you.
This is called How Do I Know? And a lot of times when people hear the phrase, how
Can
do
y'all
I
hear?
know, the next thing they say is what? How do I know what? But the key really isn't to know what. The key is to know why. Because when you know your why, you have options on what your what can be. For instance, my why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. My what is stand-up comedy. My what is writing books. My what can be going out with some friends to eat. In fact, another what that has moved me towards my why is a web series that we have out now called Break Time. So every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, you should subscribe to the channel. We do a series called Break Time on YouTube. So 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode. One episode in particular, I'm about to show you a clip to. We were in Winston-Salem. So Break Time, this is how it works. I travel the country, I do stand-up comedy, probably an hour and a half at an event. And in the middle of my show, I'll just sit down and start talking to the audience. And funny just happens. Or I'll meet somebody who's really interesting. So I met this one guy, and he said that he teaches music at a school. I was like, all right, you teach music, can you sing? And then I'm just gonna show you the clip. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
So here's the thing. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time I asked him to sing, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose.
So when we talk about our why, we could call it our North Star, that guiding light for us, where we're headed, what drives us every day we go to work, whether it's, work at, in our family, doing right by our family or doing right by the people who employ us or the kids under our charge, our colleagues who might necessarily need us, right? That why is kind of like a touchstone, as it were, And I actually use that word specifically because Vicki a couple of years ago mentioned this, and I actually have two things over here, right? Well, three. I'll show you three little things I keep by my desk here. This little touchstone she gave to us a couple of years ago, and I keep this, and she said, I want you to identify something that's your touchstone, and essentially that's your why, right? Why do you do what you do? And in many respects, it's linked to your own identity, right? And for me, a big part of my identity is being a father, right? Sure, yes, husband to a wonderful wife, and I'm not just saying that because she's here, but our son is an amazing individual who is the product of two loving parents who have resources and the know-how to navigate the educational system and to get him what we think that he deserves, educationally speaking, and to function in society, but also succeed, right? And the touchstone for me is not necessarily him specifically, but the idea that every child deserves that same benefit, right? And I feel like my wife and I, we in particular, whatever our son gets, every child should get, and we work toward that, right? Now that's the personal touchstone, my personal why. But then I believe one way that we do that is through our systems, and how do we make sure our systems work? And that's why I keep this I love public schools piece, because I feel strongly that our public schools are what makes it possible for some students who otherwise wouldn't be able to succeed, right? So I keep those as my personal why and my collective why. My personal why of why I do what I do, but also my collective responsibility as part of a person within the system. And the other thing I keep is this, because I know I got to keep making money so I can take my wife to the beach from time to time. All right.
One of the things that I love about what he says is he talks about inspiring others to walk in or toward their purpose. And I really believe that teachers who center their why are they there, want to inspire the children in their classrooms to walk in and toward their purpose. And that means that we have to support and encourage all of our kids. And it doesn't matter what their identity is. And often, occasionally I'm sure that UCA is going to be unhappy with me. I'm going to get in trouble, which I do on a frequent basis, but that's okay.
Yes,
I get in trouble for good things. But, I talk to our undergraduate students and I tell them that if you cannot be an advocate for and you cannot support every child that steps across the threshold of your classroom, then I'm not interested in you getting a degree from UCA. Because we don't pick and choose. We don't get to decide. I don't say, okay, I don't understand the parents that have the child's parents that has two mothers or two fathers. You don't get to pick. Those kids come into your classroom, and if you cannot be kind and you cannot be supportive and you cannot advocate for them so that they can then turn around and walk in or toward their purpose, then you do not belong in public education. You just don't. And so I think that that's one of the reasons that we are so passionate about what we do at UCA, is because we see teachers who every day are living out their why in everything that they do.
And teachers sacrifice a lot for their students. We have a lot of work to do, because I think in many respects there is that personal why of, yes, I believe this, I'm totally committed to it. But then there's the other piece that Vicki and I talk about is, so how do I do this? How do I fulfill my why? How do I make sure that I'm doing what I need to be doing for all of my students, regardless of their family situation, their race, their religion, their reading ability, their whatever, right? So what we did, and in addition to the PD credit that you're going to, of course, earn for this time, we're going to give you 2 extra gifts. One, we're going to give you 10 very general, they might be kind of specific, but 10 good tips for how to, make sure that you are providing a culturally responsive classroom. By culturally responsive, that means respective to all identities. It's not just restricted to race or ethnicity. This is like when you see these, you're going to realize that a lot of this is just good teaching. It's being empathetic. It's being focused. It's like letting kids know what is expected of them. And this is one gift. And looking at the time, I have a feeling that your second gift is you're going to get out of here early. And so that's something that we're going to unwrap here pretty soon. So, all right. So we're going to start off, and feel free to take screenshots of this. This is not copyrighted in any sense. These are things that we want to share with you. The first tip I want to encourage you, and by the way, I will say this too. Some of these you're going to say, I already know that. I already do that. And that's why you're a culturally responsive educator, right? That's, Michelle, you are not using the camera to take a screenshot.
Okay, I just want to say, I don't think it's nice for you to call out students on Zoom right now. And I have a non-Apple computer that I am working on, so don't get started with me, mister. Okay. All right, I'm muting again.
Okay, all I'm trying to do is be a warm demander here. So a warm demander.
You can't say no. She's not buying that at all.
No. But a warm demander is actually a researched term. This is a specific term used for for educators, any educator, not just teachers, but any educator who holds students to very high expectations and standards, but shows them flexibility in how they meet those standards, right? And shows them empathy when things don't work the way that they should, right? It's a person who is nurturing, but doesn't exhibit this, I'm going to feel sorry for you, so I'm going to let you slide on these things, right? Vicki?
Several years ago, I had a student who posted something, a former student who posted something on Facebook about me. And at first I was like, oh man, that kind of stung a little bit. And then I'm like, oh no, it was a nice thing. So the student called me the Velvet Hammer. And said
The Velvet Hammer.
The Velvet Hammer. And said that he had struggled in school, and I taught special education, and that I had been the Velvet Hammer, so that I pounded him into shape, but I did it in a very soft way. And I think that kind of comes back to this. And I always thought, when I see warm demander, I think about this student who said that I kind of pounded him into shape, and I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound very nice, but I did it in a very caring way. So I think one of the things that we want to do and again, we're not lowering our standards. We don't want to lower our standards, but we want to support and scaffold students so that they can reach and attain those goals. And showing them flexibility in how they demonstrate their learning. That means that not everybody has to write a 10-page essay on something. They can create a podcast. They can do something, a video through clips. They can do all kinds of things that would demonstrate their learning, that really speaks to their motivation. What are they motivated to? Their creativity. And how can they show you? Just because they can't write that essay at the same level as some students doesn't mean that they haven't learned the content. And so we need to recognize that in our students and allow for that flexibility.
I was thinking about grades and how we assign grades. When I taught high school English, I'd give quizzes. Now, of course, if I were teaching high school English now, I think I would reconsider how I do quizzes because, what am I really asking, right? And I remember there was this one student I had, he read all the time. He read what we needed to read, the classroom assignment, but then he moved on to something else he wanted to read. And there was a kind of a lag because all the other kids were going in time, right? And he had finished the reading assignment way early. So then we have a quiz, and he doesn't do well on the quiz because he forgot a lot of what was on the stuff, right? So I remember going to him and I said, I know you read this, why didn't you you didn't know this? And he goes, no, I can't remember her name, the lady. I was like, oh yeah. And we started talking about it, and it is apparent to me that he read it, that he understands it. He got the themes, he knew the characters. And at that point I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and give you 100 on the quiz. Oh, really? Really? I'm like, well, it's obvious that you know what I need you to know, so you know. I mean, why do I need to say, no, this quiz was the ultimate demand arbiter of whether you know or not, right? And I think we have to be flexible like that. One teaching technique that I didn't know whenever I first started back in the early 90s, but I soon learned was my best friend were rubrics. But the problem that I had when I first started using rubrics was I was using other people's rubrics. In fact, rubrics that were printed out in the Macmillan text or Houghton Mifflin, whatever, they'd give me a rubric and I'm going to use that rubric and everything. It was better, right? It gave some standards and everything. But then I realized my instructions for the assignment didn't always match with the rubric. Like what I told them to do didn't always match with how I was going to actually assess them. And I had to learn really quickly, wait a second, we're going to have to talk about this. So I need to make sure that students can see that what I'm asking them is how I'm going to grade them, because ultimately these kids look at these grades as the measure of, am I smart or not? Do I know this stuff? Am I worthy? Whatever. And a lot of times it's our fault whenever they don't measure up because we're not clear with them about what we're asking them to do, right?
And teachers will say, oh, well, it's just, I don't want to give them a rubric because it just tells them what they're supposed to do. And that is just crazy to me. You're not telling them exactly how to do it in a rubric. You're just telling them the criteria for which you're going to grade them. And that's only fair. I mean, I want to know as an employee what my provost is going to use to evaluate my performance. Mm-hmm. And if she thinks that, for me, if she thinks that me meeting with donors and bringing in outside sources of income is really important, that'll be something that I put my energy in. But if it's something that they're like, the university doesn't care about at all, and that's not being unfair. In fact, that's being really fair when you are very clear with the expectations.
That's right. That's right.
Providing specific and targeted feedback, and that general feedback of, oh, you're doing such a good job is sweet and kind, and it might support people, but it's not going to help them get better, and it's not going to help them identify what they need to do to change or what they're already doing well. So that really specific, and I know we have Julie as a math teacher here, that really specific feedback of, I like the way you were able to, or I see that you are able to do X, Y, and Z. I'm wondering if you could think about this in a different way. That's what's really going to help your students improve. And sitting next to them and doing that side by side, oh, here, look at this, what do you think about that? And critically questioning how they're performing on tasks and giving that really specific feedback will allow students to do better. And that's just good for all of us. It's really good for all of us.
That's right. Vicki, you were just referring to a research-supported method of providing feedback. I call it the sandwich, just bun, meat, bun, of mention the strengths. I appreciate how you ... organize your information. Now I have questions about, why did you choose this? Why did you choose that? What are you going to do here? And then next steps. Okay, so what I need you to do is this. And I'm going to come back to you.
Love that.
And then we do the follow-up, because all of what that does is, the reason why it's so important is that feedback equals dialogue. Dialogue equals respect, right? And talking about respect, when we talk about learned helplessness, a lot of our students keep raising their hands and raising their hands and raising their hands, partly because they want that perfect score on whatever, or they've never been taught to empower themselves. And we do students no favor as warm demanders by not teaching them how to help themselves. So that 3 before me is one of the most effective strategies, where you say, look, you need to talk with 3 of your classmates and find out the answer to a question before you come ask me. It could be, one of those 3 could be the internet, Google it, or something, or look in the syllabus, but consult 3 sources before you come talk to me. But learned helplessness is something that we really need to work on with our students if we're going to empower them.
And learned helplessness is a really big thing in special education. And I can't tell you how many times I've had kids with disabilities that have just been beat down by the system to the point that they've given up. And every message that they've gotten about themselves is, you can't do it. You can't do it. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You can't figure this out. And that was one of the biggest things that I did as a special educator, was to really encourage and support these kids as they struggled through it, because they needed to struggle through it, and they needed to struggle through it, and then they needed to be successful. And so I wanted to make sure that I was pushing them to do it on their own, not doing it for them. And I have lots of stories early in my career where I was like doing stuff for kids, and I buttoned this little girl's, working in a preschool for children with fairly significant disabilities, and I was buttoning her coat every day, and the OT came to me and said, "Oh, she can button her coat." And I was like, no. And she's like, who's going to be there to button her coat when she's in second grade? And I'm like, good point. So we need to push our kids to do things on their own, but at the same time, we need to empower them, and we need to support them as they struggle.
That's right.
So providing checklists for kids, those are always really good examples of, here's what you need to do. It's really systematic. I do this, then I do this, then I do this. And for our kids with disabilities, you can do that in a written format that is really nice checklist. You can do it in an auditory format, or you can do it in a visual format to make sure that you're being inclusive of all of your kids. But again, these are things that will lead you to culturally responsive classrooms, because often it's that communication that is a breakdown for our students.
For sure. One pet peeve of mine, and it's supported by research, is when people give points to students for anything that's unrelated to the instructional objective. Oh, you have ruffles on the side of your piece of paper, I'm going to count off points. It was late. So I think I turned something into the dean a day late. She didn't take any points off of it, at all. Like in real life, we don't generally have issues like that, right? I think it's more of a compliance. We just want you to do what we told you to do to make it our job easier, right? Heck, just awarding extra credit is a problem, because essentially you're saying, look, I acknowledge that you can't master this content, so I'm going to give you some other route to save face, to get the grade that you need to take home. So whether it's bringing Kleenex to school, and I give you extra credit points for bringing me things that otherwise that I would purchase, and that's a real true thing that I've observed. Or I'm going to give you extra credit for this word search puzzle. Well, if you're teaching quadratic equations, unless that word search puzzle teaches you how to do quadratic equations, what you're doing to that student is you're being the opposite of a warm demander, and you are feeding into that learned helplessness. You're essentially saying, I get it, you can't do it. We both acknowledge that you can't do it. So you know what? Here's the way to get out. You clean the lab?
Yeah, I cleaned the lab.
I hope you mean lab and not...
No, the lab. Sorry about that. That's an unfortunate error right there.
Yes. But that's the thing though, right? We have these ways, I guess, because we're kind of bound by grades, right? Because parents and students really feel like these grades are so important, right? Well, I think in many respects we can help students by just reconfiguring what it is that we're really asking students. Why are we putting these students in a position where they need to have extra credit or whatever, right? Vicki, the next one.
So I absolutely love this one. Amplify students as they speak to their identity and to the identity of their culture. It is so important for us to make sure that our classrooms represent all of the kids in the classroom, so that you have posters up that are male and female and Hispanic and Black and students of color who don't identify as Black, and families who are gay and straight, and families that are raising grandchildren, and all of the different ethnicities and religions that you can have. The more that you have that, when a kid walks into your classroom, they automatically think I belong and I feel safe here. And that's what we want our kids to do. They need to feel safe because they're not going to learn if they don't feel safe. And so the more that we can get them to think, to feel like their culture and their identity is embraced in the classroom, the better they are at making progress in your classroom. The easier it is for them to learn, the more that they will take away from that classroom. And my son is a second-year teacher and English teacher in Tennessee. And first year he taught high school, this year he taught middle school. And I went up, and it was pre-COVID, and we were, decorating his classroom with plexiglass, because, that's what you did this year. We decorated with plexiglass. So we built plexiglass stuff and put it all over his classroom. And he had posters up, and I said to him, do you realize that all of your posters in your room are girls? They're all girls in English classroom. and he's like, I bought these posters. And I'm like, yeah, well, totally. You bought those posters from somebody who has some bias going on. And he's like, yeah, you're right. So we purposely went out and bought posters that showed boys writing, boys involved in poetry, boys doing all of these things that he really wanted to model for the classroom. And we put those up in his classroom. But looking around, look at your school. And I know this is a little off the topic, and I just want to say that, I am not anti-Christmas. In fact, my family can tell you that that is one of my favorite holidays. But if you have a student in your school that is not Christian, having a Christmas tree as they walk into the building, not so good. And I think about what I did when I was a teacher. I mean, I had a Christmas tree in my classroom, and we did a Christmas play every year, and we did all of that. If I had it to do over again, I would not do that. And I just assumed that all of the kids in my classroom were Christian, and then found out later on that they weren't. And so if I want my space to be inclusive, we have to think about all of those things. And even if it's something that you really like to do, you really like to have a Christmas tree, and you really like to decorate, I'm going to do that at my house, and I'm not going to do it in a school where it might make somebody feel unwelcome. Because again, my Christianity says to me, you welcome people.
And, when we have students, like what Vicki was just talking about was being an ally to students, really, of helping them find their identity or amplify their identity and their culture. Part of that, too, is helping them to go forward and challenge aspects of the status quo. When they see injustice, we need to encourage that. If we're going to be culturally responsive, if we're going to build trust with our students, we need to let them know that we understand that their identity is being threatened, and that we have a responsibility to support them in that. And one way to support that is to help teach them how to interact and dialogue effectively. Because if you work with kids, you know that kids don't always know how to communicate effectively. And I'm not saying that they have to communicate the way that we communicate, but we also want them to be able to be, for them to achieve a sense of success at, whenever they do challenge something, or if they want to have a discussion, you want them prepared. So I think in many respects, by incorporating as many opportunities in our classroom for social dialogue, the better. And I'm not just talking about turn and talks and think, pair, shares. Those are great, and we want to keep doing those. But we also need to teach students how to, for example, get in groups of threes and have a sustained conversation about, okay, what are our challenges this semester? What are our strengths? What are our focuses? And you as teacher, you adjust those questions based on the students in the groups to what's going on in the classroom, because you want students to feel, again, safe, right? So if you want to keep it all positive, you don't want to focus on challenges, you can say, let's talk about what we're learning from this, and we're going to share, and we want to go deeper. Let's go a little bit deeper into what you think that we can do with this content in real life, for example, right? So you want to encourage that sustained conversational ability with our students.
And a lot of this really comes down to that universal design for learning. And that is what you do proactively as you are creating your lessons, as you are creating your activities. And that's using your why to help you design those lessons. So you're putting in things in place where kids have opportunity to talk, and they have multiple ways to express their learning, and there's representation of their identities in the curriculum materials, and you're building that all in at the very beginning so that students are able to access the material. Is it read to them? Can they get it in a different way? So all of that makes it sets them up for success, because that's exactly what you're wanting to do. And I know that universal design for learning came from special education, but really it's just good teaching. And that's what good teachers were doing it way before people labeled it universal design for learning. And that is really simplistic, but that's kind of the crux of culturally development or culturally responsive teaching, is when you're developing lessons that meet those students' needs, and you're respecting their background, and you're respecting them and their identities.
Mm-hmm. And these tips right here, these aren't just for us, these are for us to share with our colleagues. Whenever they inevitably complain about students, have you tried X, Y, and Z? You know, I've tried this and it's worked for me. It may not work for you, but you know, you may want to try it, right? I am going to put in the chat a link here. At 1:30, I'm going to be actually doing another, just a 1 hour PD that goes into more detail on these culturally responsive pieces. There are 10 principles, and I'm going to provide more practical examples. So I'm going to put that in the chat here. And in a second, Miss Melissa is going to send a little link to an evaluation for this session. But I love it when the dean introduces our next two guest speakers, so to speak.
So, you know, if you've read anything that James Baldwin has written, it's like reading poetry, and it's so powerful. And I love this quote. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And sometimes our bias and our just getting so caught up in the what we do and where we do it and how we do it clutters our day, and we forget that why. And so it's really important to take some time occasionally, and hopefully this workshop provided that, where you just have a breather and you get to step back, take a breather, and look at things that you might see in your environment, in your school, in your district, that is not equitable. And then think about how you can face that and what you can do to help change that.
And it can be daunting, you know, it can feel like, you know, we can't solve all the problems in our district, in our school, in our state, in our nation. But, you know, that young lady who gave our inauguration poem in January, she reminds us that it's so critically important just to be, to do. You know, we have our own spheres of influence. Even if we impact in a positive way our classroom, and one student gains because of that, if one of our colleagues gains from that, that's a win right there. But you know, we can't see it happen unless we make it happen, right? We believe that.
I think this one really speaks to advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
It is our job to stand up for kids when they don't have the power in the system that we do. It is our job to be brave enough to help them push through, and it's our job to I mean, all kinds of things. From when I was a special ed teacher, the principal told me that my kids with disabilities had to sit in the back of the auditorium when we had a big presentation, because he didn't want the people who were doing the presentation to see my children. And I had children that had visual impairments, and just saying, no, that's not right. Absolutely not. I got there early. We sat in the front row. You know, and you have to be brave enough to change the system. You have to be brave enough to say to the teacher who says, well, you know, that kid, you have to be brave enough in the teacher's lounge and you say, you know, I don't want to hear that. Or I noticed that you say that kid. I'm wondering if you can tell me what that means. I love that. I noticed blank and I'm wondering blank. I've noticed that you've said that kid several times and I'm wondering what that means. And it might not do anything other than make that person think twice before they say that in front of you.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing. We can't change who people are. People have to change themselves, and sometimes it takes time. But they need to know that if their efforts aren't focused on all kids having equitable opportunities, we don't want to hear it. You know, we want to support them whenever they want equity. Now, the exciting time, exit ticket time.
So why is it important for you to lead equity efforts in your classroom or your organization? Please type that in the chat. And as you're typing it in the chat, I just want to thank you all. I know that often when you sign up for professional development, you know, we're preaching to the choir. So the people who are really as interested in reading go to reading. The people who are really interested in math go to math. The people who are really interested in equity show up at these. And so thank you so much for being here and for your efforts, because I am sure that each one of you are leading equity efforts in your classroom and in your school. And just know that if you ever need any help or any assistance, whether you are a graduate of UCA or not, we are always here and always willing to help and support our teachers, because our heart really lies with K-12 education.
Thank you all so much for joining us.
I'll continue playing my Yo-Yo Ma, and you guys can, after you're finished in the chat, you can go ahead and sign off, and Melissa has put the information in there for us. Thank you, Melissa, for doing that about your PD. If you don't get your PD certificate within 24 to 48 hours, please reach out to us and we'll make sure you get that. Wishing you all the best school year ever, because everybody deserves the best school year ever after last year.
Thank y'all.